Welcome back to our Next Respect Project talk with the Never Alone initiative with the Chopra Foundation. I am so happy to introduce you to Gabriella Wright, who is one of the co-founders of the Never Alone initiative. She's an actress, model, activist, spirit, beautiful force of light in the world. And I'm so thrilled to talk to her about how and why she decided to create the Never Alone initiative. POONACHA MACHAIAH is the CEO of the Chopra Foundation and co-founder of the Never Alone initiative as well. GITA VAID, MD, is a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst and the co-founder of the Center for Natural Intelligence. She's also the head of the Psychedelic Medicine and Public Awareness Education Initiative at the Chopra Foundation. Dr. SRINI PILLAY is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, brain researcher, and the CEO and president of NUEROBUSINESS Group. And GOLI SAMII, a dear friend, actress, writer, acting coach, and is a dream analyst. So without further ado, I'm so interested to talk to you guys about what I think the world needs now more than ever, which is a format, a community, a place to go, to feel united, to feel less alone, to deal with trauma, especially after COVID, where we all have PTSD and we've been through quite a lot. I think there's a universal message with the Never Alone movement that really has a big influence on each of us, even if we don't have feelings of depression or anxiety and so forth, or we don't identify with suffering in that way. But Gabriella, I wanted to talk to you first about why you were inspired to create the Never Alone initiative. I know it's deeply personal and now it's 2 years later. So just to have a little bit of the origin story, I think is a great place to start.
Thank you so much, Elisabeth. Thank you for sharing your platform and creating these respect talks. I mean, I feel there's so much to say. Just to answer your question, you're right, it has been 2 years. Never Alone was born under circumstances that GOLI, my dear friend here, knows so well. 3 years ago on the 16th of June, I lost my little sister to suicide. And that just blew my whole sense of identity out of the window. Who my family was, who my family is, who I am. And it just literally just, you know, like a building you can see disintegrate, you know, when they're reformatting the building and redesigning. That's how it felt for me. And I was like, wow, I was oblivious to a source of suffering that was beyond my comprehension, and yet that was silently being a witness to the reality that we all live in. And for me, as much as it was a tragedy, because it still is, it still is a tragedy, but there's a cycle to a tragedy. And thanks to GOLI, my friend here, who actually connected us, Elisabeth, I've been witnessing her life as well as a best friend, and she just has so much resilience towards all of the stories that she will share later on, and through her being part of my acting coach and also my best friend, I realized that there are ways to overcome this, not only for my self-healing but my family's healing. One suicide is also a family suicide. You know, that's undeniable. It's a reality. And you watch your other family members crumble before you and like, I have to do something about it. Now, I didn't know what that would look like. I had no idea what the universe had in store. I had no idea how, once you put an intention out, that it reveals itself through different organizing, I would say, powers. That's what Deepak would say. But one thing led me to another, where I was able to meet Deepak. I was able to meet him almost 8 months after my sister passed away. And it was in a form of an interview, because I've been studying consciousness for the last 20 years. So I was asked by this one director to please interview Deepak on consciousness. I was like, there are so many experts, I don't need to be here. They was like, no, I would really like you to be here. And so it so happened that I started talking about telepathy, autism, and consciousness with Dr. Deepak Chopra. And that allowed to a broader conversation where I was able to ask him, I was like, did you realize that, you know, every 40 seconds someone does die by suicide in the world, and that there is a deeper suffering? And he was like, Well, I wasn't aware of those numbers. He was aware of suffering because that's part of his life's work, but those numbers were very triggering. And then he introduced me to POONACHA, and one thing led to another. I was working on a film that GOLI was aware of called The Offering. Now it's called We Are Never Alone. And I was playing a mother who loses her son to suicide. And so for me, everything was just too close to home. You know, everything was just writing on the wall. And if I wasn't reading it, I was definitely reading it maybe with a different perspective. And so what happened is Deepak was like, let's help you finish your film. And then POONACHA came in. We can't do a film without creating a movement. It doesn't make sense. Why would Deepak be doing a film? and then POONACHA's like, okay, Never Alone. It needs to be called Never Alone. I was like, oh, okay. So it's basically everything happened without me triggering its existence. It was just more of a reflection saying, with the intention of, we need to make sure that people do not suffer in silence. And the tragedy that I went through, and the tragedies that my friends have gone through, like GOLI, only gave me more inspiration to give birth to this. And now it almost doesn't belong to me, to us. It's an offering to the world, and we're all here in the vessel of the offering, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, it's important to talk about, how much we all can benefit from the Never Alone initiative. Maybe even if we haven't gone through deep anxiety or panic, like Dr. SRINI has spent many, many years, being an expert in this suffering. But for those of us as human beings and consciousness, I mean, we all suffer. And so I think the Never Alone initiative, like you said about POONACHA's perspective, it is a movement. It's a way of us evolving into a new way of consciousness and how we dance with suffering. Most of us who've lost people to suicide in this conversation, I would say, were surprised in a sense by the death of that loved one, because people do suffer in silence. But when you make this conversation of suffering more accessible and more mainstream and less of a secret, and having less of a stigma, and we recognize that this is something that touches all of us, and we make this more accessible, then we can collectively heal as a society. Actually, it's one thing I really wanted to ask both you and POONACHA, which is, I know you have a different perspective on suffering. And I'm curious what your different perspectives on suffering are, because I think I feel maybe a little bit of both perspectives. And I guess that's really, at the end of the day, it's how we perceive our suffering, that fuels so much of our pain or anxiety and so forth in this existence. So I'm curious what your thoughts are, POONACHA, especially, and also just to ask you, why the Chopra Foundation and Deepak decided to become co-founders of the Never Alone initiative, and what the intention is behind that.
So I think, thank you, Elisabeth. First of all, thank you for the honor to have this conversation. I think this happened as an accident. It wasn't really, wasn't in our agenda to look at mental health and suicide prevention. When Gabriella came in with the movie, we said, then we got to look at the data. And Deepak always talks about awareness. And I think everything about mental health is, like Deepak says, is confusing yourself with your selfie. It's okay to be alone. A solitude is okay. Loneliness is not okay. If you're in solitude and deeply connected with your soul, that's fine. That's beautiful. And that's what awareness is all about. But when you don't have that, that's when, the pandemic of loneliness hits you. And that's really what started the journey. When you started Never Alone, we said, and this is before the pandemic, we said we got to go to every school in the country and really look at loneliness as an epidemic. As a technologist, I was very fascinated by it. Like, at a time when we are super connected, we're also the most loneliest. Isn't that an irony? You have, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, pick the messenger you want. You can connect with anybody, but you're all-time lonely. And that really, really wanted us to kind of say, let's kind of look at this whole area of loneliness. People are lonely at work. People are lonely in teams. People are lonely in marriages. People are lonely on Zoom calls, right? People are just lonely. And we said, let's kind of maybe go back and look at that and look at the dynamics and look at the research behind it and what could we do? So that really became the charter of the Chopra Foundation. We said, We want to reach 1 billion people for a joyful, energetic body, a loving, compassionate heart, a reflective and alert mind, and lightness of being. And that really is physical well-being, mental well-being, social well-being, planetary well-being, and spiritual well-being. And when you have these 5 areas, you have total well-being. So that's when the Never Alone became part of the mental health agenda of the Chopra Foundation. So that's kind of, my take on why Never Alone came into it. And from a suffering perspective, I have a different theory on it. I think suffering is optional. I mean, I say, Gabriella comes from Buddhism, and I come back and I said, when you're born, your mother holds this baby and says, oh my God, this is the most beautiful child, and there's so much of joy. And then life happens. Life happens, right? And Krishnamurti says, comparison and conformity lead to conflict. A mind without conflict is a spiritual mind, right? And I think today what happens is that our conditioning leads to suffering. And I think that's optional. I think the story is the more we talk about trauma, the more trauma there is. So I really believe I want to kind of reframe conversations, present moment awareness. That means there's a past, yeah, but you can't really dwell on it too much. So I think it's a point in time. So it's just a perspective. And I think over my life, over 51 years of my life, I've realized that resilience is key. Adversity happens to everybody. Doesn't matter if you're rich, doesn't matter if you're poor, doesn't matter if you're a billionaire. And that's what the pandemic taught us. Everybody is going through the same storm. Some people are in yachts, some people are in boats, some people are in boats with holes, but we're all facing the same storm. What you do is more important. So that's just a perspective.
It's interesting that you talk about this sort of digging into conflict in the mind, because that was why I decided to create the Respect Project. Invite people in from different perspectives to have a respectful conversation on a myriad of topics and to agree to disagree in a really respectful manner. And through this lexicon comes solutions, because we realize we're not in conflict. Why can't we have respectful conversation and have a respectful relationship with ourselves as well? So to sort of eliminate this need for this, I don't know, this suffering and this drama that we like to engage in. And also the fact that, yes, I think loneliness is an epidemic, and that even if you're the brightest light of sunshine and you wake up in the morning and you're exuberant and you celebrate life, that even you have to be vigilant with yourself about the mind and the body and the spirit and so forth, and you're buying into your whatever that suffering is, so that you can continue to stay in that place. So that type of vigilant conversation, which we share with our intimate best friends and colleagues, I wanted to make a public spectacle of it. The way GOLI and Gabriella are talking, and Gabriella and me and GOLI were friends, and now GITA and SRINI and POONACHA, and getting to know new friends. But the level of conversation, that it's really intimate, real, because through talking, we heal. I think we heal through talking because we realize that our thoughts don't have as much power as we gave those thoughts. Once we say it out loud, we realize it doesn't have as much power over us. And that's where, when we get into suicide, keeping those thoughts inside, those secrets. Every person I've lost to suicide, I was surprised when I found out that they had killed themselves, that they kept all of that inside and they didn't put it out into the world, gave it too much power over them. They couldn't bear it. They couldn't carry that weight anymore.
I want to add one point to that, Elisabeth. When the data says 75% of the people who attempted suicide have actually spoken to somebody, right? They've actually spoken about somebody. We just didn't know how to react. And I have this analogy in life. It says when you're training an actor, you're an acting coach. When you go into Olympics, you probably have 10 coaches. And you become a golfer, you have 15 coaches. In the Olympics of life, which is the biggest Olympics, how come we don't have coaches? How come we don't have the support structure? When I went through my deep, dark nights of the soul, I think my coaches were like SRINI and GITA and Deepak, And so everybody needs, and that's one of the things about Never Alone, is you really have to figure out who's your tribe, right? And you got to have, in that 3 a.m. in the morning, and you have those moments, and you have to pick up the phone call and call somebody. Do you have those 1 or 2 people who you can lean on? And that's really, I think, one of the things we want to do in Never Alone is to help build that network.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about that because you guys just completed a summit for 13 hours with experts from all walks of life and expertise and so forth. Gita, why don't you talk a little bit about that summit? I know you were a part of it, and I'm so interested in, like you said, POONACHA, talking about that network. And you guys did that for 13 hours. And now, how can we access all of that information that you gathered at that summit? But just to get a little bit into, Gita, the work you're doing, I'd love to hear what you talked about at the summit.
Thank you. Well, I'm excited to be here. It's so exciting and so important to be having these conversations, because mental health is a disaster right now. But at the same time, there are new possibilities emerging and a whole range of options that we're spearheading in our work at the Chopra Foundation. So I think just to have awareness that even if one feels desperate, that there are possibilities that are available, and just to have that knowledge spread is so important. And the work that I'm doing is very much involved with some of these new modalities, which I think can transform mental health and allow for different avenues of healing that previously have not been available. Currently, mental health is all based on diagnosing and treating people. And as a psychiatrist, and I'm sure SRINI will agree, we're really trained to diagnose very well. But there isn't someone who's not diagnosable. So that alone is a problem, because what does it mean then to be healthy? And treatment currently involves symptom management, just giving medicines to suppress the pain, which is very important if one is in pain. But it doesn't get behind the pain or build health. And that's true of all of us. We're all diagnosable. We all have problems in life. We all confront hardships. But how do we also recognize we're full, we're complete, we're healthy, and we have healthy parts and less healthy parts? And that's the human condition. And we can build health and build resilience and build strategies for regulation. And we heal ourselves and we heal each other. And that's the work I'm involved with psychedelic medicines. When used in appropriate individuals, it's not for everyone, but with the right context, and sometimes with individuals where it's not appropriate, other analogous practices like meditation and access to non-ordinary states, even through breath work, can be incredibly healing. And so that's really what I'm excited about bringing awareness to and talking about, and also working with this incredibly inspired group of individuals to reduce suffering in the world.
GOLI, I know, thank you, Gita, for giving me, I want to hear much, much, much more about it and all of the work you're doing. But to pivot to GOLI, I know that you particularly, and GOLI, you've been through a lot in your life, and I want to hear a little bit about why it's so pertinent for you to be a part of the Never Alone initiative. But specifically, I know you really healed through psychedelics and dealt with addiction and trauma. If you would talk about it a little bit, I think it's interesting.
Thank you so much, everybody. It's so nice to be with all of you. You know, there's a lot that POONACHA was saying that I may have a bit of a slight disagreement with for me, because I think that, you know, when it comes to mental health and suicide, there's so many different kinds of people that battle suicide, and many committed. And, you know, I come from Iran, and I went through a revolution as a child. And then my best friend was the Shah of Iran's daughter, Layla. And her brother, Ali Reza, was my second best friend. And we stayed together through everything. And Layla died of a very bad overdose suicide in London when I was 29. Then Ali Reza shot himself 10 years later in the head, dressed in the Iranian royal garment, and boom. And my brother hung himself. And those of us who came from a kingdom and went through that revolution had something happen that's beyond explicable when your father is a king and now you're in hiding and they're killing everyone. And I believe that my brother, Layla, and Ali Reza, and a few of the nephews of the king who also hung themselves, really would not have killed themselves if we'd never gone through the revolution. I believe that in everything that's inside me. I know who they are. And the severity of the shocks we went through, beyond shocks, murders, and it did. And they all talked about suicide, all three of them. They were talking about suicide when we were 12. Gabriella tried to help me with my brother. We went to exorcists. We tried everything. And Ali Reza just got up and shot himself. But they'd always talked about it. And though some people are not alone, Gabriella goes, I went to the fire for the people I love. Like, I did not give up on Leila, Ali Reza, or my brother. I was there. I never left them alone. I could stay 14 hours on a phone call, and still they didn't. Still they didn't. And I was doing it by taking 20 ecstasies a day, massive men beating me, beatings like you've never seen. But I kept trying to get better. I was of service. I started volunteering. I went to doctors. I went to ashrams. I went everywhere looking for help, internal help, not, And then I did ibogaine, which is a psychedelic. I'd never wanted to do ayahuasca. I did the ibogaine after my brother's death. And it was the first thing that got me sober. I've been institutionalized since I'm 29. I could not stay sober, nothing. And the iboga, the plants, it saved my life. I know that. And if my brother or Ali Reza, and they had faced their pain like that, maybe they would live too. But for me being, watching what, Gabriella started her movie way before a year before her sister died. And it was right when my brother had died. And it was such a premonition or a prelude to what would be in a very important movement that I think is the most important movement, because suicide is so real. It is so real. And it's a hell to be left behind, because you
Well, hang in there to see if we hear the end of that sentence.
I know.
Anyway, I would.
Well, I will say this, no matter, Goli, it's hard to hear you. Last night I had somebody over for dinner and I'd never met her before. And she told me that her father had committed suicide. And I was so surprised to hear this. And she was sharing with me the background as to why. And it's because he was put into early retirement from the Air Force, and he fell into a deep despair over it. So I guess going back to POONACHA and talking about this sort of the mental health aspect of this, of whatever your perceived suffering is, it is deeply personal, like Goli said. And I think the Never Alone initiative is creating modalities like we're talking about, a community. And I want to get into the app for the Never Alone initiative, as well as Dr. SRINI. I want to get to you finally, because you're a Harvard-trained psychiatrist. You've specialized in anxiety and panic disorders and so forth. I think the world has been suffering from this during COVID, but also you've been working on an app called Circa, and I would just love to hear more about that.
Sure. So, well, firstly, thank you for having me. It's always enriching to be in a conversation that's this diverse, and I'm suspicious of the notion of differences, because sometimes I think that differences are narratives that are defenses against our fundamental non-duality. But I'll put that aside for a second and sort of say that I think what Circa is an app that's meant to help you reduce anxiety by targeting parts of the brain where there's too much blood flow, to be able to move it away from there, and reduce anxiety through different forms of self-talk. So the C of Circa is chunking. The I is ignore mental chatter, which is a form of mindfulness practice. The R is reality check, where you have a kind of self-talk and you say, this too shall pass. The second C is control check, which is a lot like the serenity prayer, which is essentially about trying to identify what you cannot control and letting go of that. And then the last A is attention shift, which is paying attention to the solution rather than the problem. And by training your brain to take that kind of approach, what we want to do, what POONACHA and I are actually doing, is trying to get people into the habit of addressing the anxiety, and even at some level befriending the anxiety, coming to know it, coming to know the lessons that you can learn from it. And I do think that cognitive approaches and brain-based approaches are especially helpful. But I think both POONACHA and I know that this is sort of the beginning of what we would like to introduce people to, because I think cognitive approaches are a way to start to still the mind and to stop the restlessness that can lead to states of despair and suicide. But I think we both agree that there are other dimensions of depth. I certainly think there's a lot that psychoanalytic treatments can offer, insights from psychedelics can offer about the nature of the self. And for me, what's really attractive about the Never Alone Foundation is that it speaks to a fundamental belief of mine, which is that suicide is not so much about feeling alone, but about not recognizing the fundamental connections that we all have, regardless of what we think our differences are. You know, for example, we think we are six people on this platform and we're separate, but every one of you is living inside my anatomy right now. Like, you are part of my visual cortex, and when I hear you, you're part of my auditory cortex. So you are part of my body. We are all part of each other's bodies, and in the world, I think there's so many consequences of not recognizing the fundamental connections that exist. Because when we live outside of that fundamental connection, even before you get to suicide, studies show that loneliness can cause, a feeling of loneliness, feeling separate from others, can cause not only depression and anxiety, but it can cause coronary calcification, left ventricular hypertrophy, immune dysfunction. People die earlier. And part of that, for me, philosophically and metaphorically, I think it's the body crying out for, why don't you recognize that you are connected? And so for me, the Never Alone Foundation is not just about solving the problem of loneliness, but recognizing the reality of our fundamental connection. And I think we want to invite people to that reality. And anxiety reduction is just, I think it's a small part of it, but where we want to go, I think, is into the experience and acceptance of non-duality.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, that was so much why I wanted to create this talk, because I think that this is what we share in common. It's exactly what you said. All of these various human emotions, we share them in common, but it's by degrees, and then it's these cognitive approaches that become skills and tools that we. So in other words, to POONACHA's point, we all experience adversity. It's how we move through it and how we navigate it. How do we dance with fear? If we can choose love and we can choose fear, how do we move with the fear, and how do we engage with it, and learning those skills? And so I'm curious, the cognitive approaches that you want to teach and make accessible to the masses, let's say, where can people learn these skills from you? And is it going to be on the Never Alone platform, app? I want to hear more about Circo, but also I know that all of this content you created at the summit is going to become accessible to people.
Absolutely. I think POONACHA can speak to the...
I think from a Never Alone perspective, our goal is to be always free, always accessible, and for the people who need it the most, right? And that means every part of the world who needs access to the technology. Our goal is to make it accessible. So it's going to be online, on mobile. Hopefully we'll translate into multiple languages, because this is a global thing. I think what GOLI said, suicide is a stigma, right? In certain, like, especially, just think about the irony, right? You look at physical health on Google, just go type it out, physical health, you see six-pack abs. You say mental health, you see somebody holding their face down or something like that. There's a stigma. If you go to India, I'm sure, if you say cancer screening, people will go in. If you go back and say mental health screening, nobody's going to go in. And I think there's a reason we need to change the narrative with Elisabeth, the work you're doing, and GABRIELLA, in storytelling. We need to redefine mental health. So I think our goal from a technology perspective is always keep it free, keep it accessible, and we will do whatever we can on multiple platforms. I think as far as Circa, we're also going to make it available through our different distribution networks to people who need it. We also have a chat bot, which I shared with you earlier.
Awesome.
What are each of, jump in if it appeals to you, but what are your thoughts on the current status of mental well-being, and what are your goals and hopes for mental health and well-being in the future? What's your dream world, if you could tell me what that looks like?
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, one thought I have, and I completely agree with what everyone is saying about non-duality, but I feel like part of the loneliness pandemic or an epidemic that we're in is caused by us living in fragments internally. And I think you can see evidence of what we're doing in the world, because our world is very fragmented. And I think that we need to connect with each other and have these different access to technologies and conversations and community to be together. And also we need to have different tools to go inwards, and some of it can involve some of it can involve treatments with new modalities, such as ones that I'm offering, but also I think some of them can be free and available widely too, such as meditation and different kind of non-ordinary state practices, because that itself is self-healing and corrective. So we can not be disconnected internally and connect more with the health in us. Really, our minds are what cause the biggest problems in our internal world, in our inner worlds, and then we project that and do a lot of damage outside in the world. But what's so encouraging is when humans heal themselves or are healed by community or in relationship, the natural impulse is to help another person. And I think we have to remember that we create a lot of destruction as a species, but there's also, when healed, a lot of love that people get transformed into, and connectedness. So I'm really hopeful that through our app, we're going to be able to offer so many more of these modalities and resources, so people from everywhere, even remote places, can have access to these healing modalities.
Gita, what inspired you to do the work? I'm curious, from you being a psychologist and all the work that you're doing, but now this new work that you're doing with the Chopra Foundation and with psychedelics. But what was your personal connection to deciding that this was your life's work? Was there an origin story that sort of drove you into this awareness of wanting to heal people?
Well, I've been in a tradition of doing healing work my whole life. My family for many generations are healers. It's in a way my family trait. And I've always been drawn to understanding people. I think from a young age, I was just very confused by people, what they did and how they acted. I mostly was studying people just to understand what's going on around me. People tell themselves stories, and to have a real connection, you need to understand their story in order to enter into their world. And this was just the way in which I saw the world. So that's my personal experience, is trying to enter into people's stories just to have connection and closeness. A natural extension of that was to become a psychiatrist, because it's what I've been doing my whole life, is studying people and trying to understand their worlds. And actually my involvement with Never Alone is very much like Gabriella's, this kind of response to the universe. I just ran into Deepak on the street. And so it's one of these random openings where we felt this synchronicity and connection, and it was just an automatic extension of the conversation that was unfolding. And I chose to listen, because these are forces at play that are bigger than any of us. And just to be invited into this conversation, an opportunity in this platform to share knowledge and to participate, is such a gift and such an honor and such a mystery.
Yeah, I think it is a mystery. I mean, our human experience, our reactions is mysterious. I mean, I'm curious, SRINI, do you feel that in dealing with anxiety and panic disorder, I mean, do you feel that all people who suffer from this can be healed?
Well, I have more questions than I have answers about them. I think the first thing I would say, just to sort of, I think, connect what Gita said with some of my thoughts as I was thinking about this, was that mental health it's problematic when we separate out our brains from the rest of our bodies, and it's problematic when we separate our bodies from everything that's outside of us. And so in an ideal world, it would be wonderful if we could have an embodied sense of integration, but not just within ourselves, but really with everything outside of ourselves. The reality is that mental health comes from an illusion. It comes from an illusion of perceiving the body in a way that I don't believe it is. We think that the more atoms we look at and the more receptors we look at, the more reality we'll find. But that is as absurd as saying that the more we look at pixels of email, the more we'll understand how email actually works. This is something that Hoffman said. I don't think I think we have to look at what's behind that. So I think from the perspective of is it possible to heal? First, we have to question the assumption that this is an illness as opposed to suffering. Suffering, I feel, is ubiquitous. And I think that to the extent that we can engage what that suffering is, it's a choice whether you want to see it as an illness or not. There are advantages to seeing it as an illness for people who don't want to have the kind of view that we're talking about. But I also think that some of the issues around psychiatry that I think are less available because of our modern paradigms are things like the fragments that I think Gita is referring to. I think the nature of our narratives is that they have coherent pieces to it, like this is why that happened. Some of that coherence is true. Many studies have shown that we just make up our narratives, so many of our narratives are untrue. And then outside of those narratives, we have what Wilfred Bion called beta elements. And these beta elements are fragments of meaning that are floating around consciousness, which require what a psychoanalyst would call libido and the generation of fantasy to hold those fragments together. So what I would say to anyone who's suffering is that if you have a part of your narrative that feels fragmentary, partly a smell, a feeling like something that you can't make sense of, we don't have to feel compelled to make sense of the random chattering of our mind. Because we probably will come up with stories that will become something, but I'm not sure that those stories will heal. I think healing may occur when we understand what is the mechanism and the driving energy outside of those narratives, as much as understanding the narratives can be helpful as well. So I do feel pretty hopeful that I think as a global community, more and more people like us are coming together. And I think biologists can talk to cognitive therapists, can talk to healers from all kinds of modalities, and that's really what's making me feel the most hopeful right now. That this problem that we're talking about, the first issue is if we continue to use the problem solution approach, we can guarantee we will have more problems.
Yes.
This has been shown throughout science. So if we leave the problem solution paradigm, then we get to a place of being and a commitment to a possibility that does not yet exist in reality, but which is a place of serenity in which one can exist. Being committed to that possibility outside of the problem solution paradigm is, I think, for me, one of the most hopeful things. It's something I call existential confidence. It does not have to do with knowing. It has to do with the discovery process of being alive.
Jump in and just respond to Goli's comment. I feel compelled to say something about Goli's story, which was so touching and so painful. And I want to, I guess, acknowledge that what you described with family members and actually yourself, I do believe is real traumatic experience that is just devastating. And I think we are living in devastating times, and there is real trauma, and that can create mental pain when we don't have the inner resources. Perhaps humans can't have the inner resources for some of the experiences you're describing. And I think that is really traumatic. And I am really excited because there are modalities, just like you gave voice to with ibogaine, which is a very powerful psychedelic medicine to actually heal ourselves. So Elisabeth, I do think we can heal ourselves, particularly with some of these new tools. Some of them are medications, some of them are practices to actually metabolize the trauma that is held in the mind and the body and to build resilience. But it's a very courageous story and painful story you described, Goli. So I just really felt called to give voice to it and acknowledge.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because Goli, you were going in and out, but I really want you to talk to everybody about the dream work that you do, because I have experienced a lot of, I guess, psychic freedom through the work that we've done together with dreams. I'd love for you to share with everybody your perspective on that. If technology is cooperating.
Sorry, my reception. So sorry, my reception's bad. I'm in the hills. So it's interesting because, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
No.
Or maybe Gabriella, you'll jump in and share a little bit about Goli's work too.
I'm good. If I can say, am I working? No. How's that?
Go for it.
I think she has to go off video for it to work.
Okay. I teach dream work, and it's ironic because Gabriella, I put her in a highest potential dream beyond her acting to find out what her message as a spokeswoman and a thought leader. And a lot of what happened with her, I mean, I call her the Ninja 007. Like, I don't know if you can hear me, but
yes, we
her
can.
dream world opened up a whole of spirituality. The portals that opened up were so incredible. And the Never Alone project was a part of what her highest potential was. See, the work I do is to align us with the universe and the plan. It's almost like taking acid without taking acid. It's like a natural utilization of your subconscious and what the highest source, which is God or your creative source, has already planned for you, but you've been in the way. And the work we do unveils that. Was I heard or?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, you were.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay.
I mean, it's so connected.
Gabby, you bring in what your experience.
Yes. So what's just to kind of sprinkle some magic over everyone's little conversations here. I think, especially with what GOLI was addressing, you know, the dream space. And so I want to take the dream space of, yes, we're getting in the way. Our stories are getting in the way. And what Gita was saying, getting in the way of ultimate holiness, the wholesome, our true self. And that's what also SRINI was talking about. It's that non-dual self, like who we truly are as highest potential in this form, because this is the world that we're navigating in. And so I almost want to say, what is our common denominator in this reality? And I want to go beyond the word mental health. I want to go beyond the practicality of the tools that we use, which could be mental hygiene and all of these things that we're using, all these different modalities. But I want to connect to the general story. And the general story that we're in is the mental space. We're all cohabiting in this mental space, and the mental space is projecting our bodies, is projecting our personalities, is projecting these identities, these different frameworks, but it's all in this beautiful space of consciousness that is infused with our innate creativity. And that innate creativity allows us to create conscious choices, allows us to create pathways to freedom from suffering. It allows us to be creators in our healing pathways to joy, to creative freedom, to expressing the storytelling of our lives. And if the storytelling of our lives, like GOLI was suggesting and saying, is yes, she's experienced a very powerful life, embedded and sprinkled with traumatic experiences. But does that define her? No. Her storytelling is bigger than the definition of trauma. And I almost want to say it's the same for me in that way. Yes, it's brought in my highest potential of collaborating and talking about the darkest nights of the soul, whether it's for myself or my family or my sister, but it's translated that into a bridge that through maybe all of us on this panel are participants in the grander story of the mental space for ultimate healing and ultimate realization of who we truly are. And I think that's, as a filmmaker, actor, dream coach, we're all playing these roles. It's all one great mental space. It's the great, you know, it's the great life and consciousness that we're living in. It's the stage. And so once we know who we truly are, then we can engage in the different roles with freedom, joy, lightness of being, that Deepak says, you know, and with clarity of mind and ultimate choice. And I think the ultimate choice is, as POONACHA was saying, let's choose to be embedded in joy despite everything. And let's learn the ways, the modalities to create that freedom of expression.
I'm so glad you said that, because as I was listening to you sort of tie it all up together, I was going to talk to POONACHA about your comment on joy, and also ask you, you know, what your thoughts are on the future of our perspective on mental health and well-being through the perspective of what Gabriella just said, which is, you know, to be conscious in this way of living in joy and choosing this this mentality towards existence.
I think we actually have a campaign, and I want to kind of give attribution to SRINI. When I went to him, I had a question once and asked him, you know, what makes you good at what you do? He said, what makes you a good psychiatrist? And I was just a question. I just had met him very recently. He said something which kind of really took me by surprise. He said, first, I love the person, and then the psychiatry person part comes after that. So I think love is something we all can choose. We have an option. I think it's basically irrespective of where we are, what it is, what we're going through. I think we have a choice, right? And I think the choice we can always through love. From a Chopra Foundation perspective, we launched a campaign called Love in Action. And these are based on the 4 A's. The first A is attention, which is deep listening. Listening with your body, mind, soul, spirit, deep listening, attention. Once you have attention, the next one is appreciation, understanding that each one of us has our own uniqueness, a unique fingerprint, right? So we're as unique, and our stories are so unique. So with deep attention comes deep appreciation. And once you have deep appreciation, the next one is affection, love, kindness, tenderness. Like I was joking before this call, the world doesn't need Tinder, it needs tender. And so really tenderness being a virtue. How do you have deep affection? And I think affection is missing in communities. And once you have all this, is acceptance. Acceptance first for yourself and then for others around you. You want people to accept who you are. So that's really, I think, one of the fundamental programs we want to bring together in communities. I think today, once again, we go to a community, we are in a community, but you're feeling alone. How do we nurture these 4 attributes of love? Attention, appreciation, affection, and acceptance.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the connection between what POONACHA is talking about and what I'm hearing from Gabriella and GOLI, which is that I'm appreciating not only the linearity of the narrative or the words in the story, but being a musician, I'm also hearing overtones and undertones and complexity to the sound of what that story is. And I think telling your story also involves invoking the music of your life into that story. So that, because the wholeness we're talking about, I think, is delightful in that way. So from my perspective, the narrative as relying solely on words is the beginning of what we can do. I think moving beyond the narrative, when you go into the connection, you invite a different kind of music. You know, it's like you could have 2 musicians playing exactly the same piece, technically correctly, exactly the same notes, and one person could be connected to the larger whole, and you will hear that. And so I feel like what I feel is so optimistic about connecting what POONACHA is talking about, which is about the joy and the self-acceptance. These, I think, are the elements that add to the music of the narrative. And I think that when I hear what GOLI is saying, when I hear what Gabriella is saying, they're talking about coming into a power that where you shift the idea from this is me to this comes through me. Mm-hmm. And once you understand that you can be that vessel, I think you emanate a very different kind of music.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I first created the Respect Project, I would say to people, I invite you to come tell the truth, your truth on behalf of others, meaning exactly what you're saying. Why go through all the things I've been through in this life if I can't make it my offering to you? You know, I've gone through my experience so that I can give it to you. All of it, you know, to tell the story. With the story comes the wisdom or the enlightenment that you get from it. But in my thought, from my childhood of being raised by 2 parents who were Buddhist, you know, I'm not engaging in the illusion of suffering. I see what I've been given as an opportunity to share with others, so that it's, you know, the only way out is through, like POONACHA was saying. So moving through it and experiencing it, we do it on behalf of each other. So to come into a conversation based in respect, we tell each other our stories, on behalf of each other. And that narrative of respect, I think, not only teaches us to do the deep listening that POONACHA is talking about, which is based in respect, but what we get out of that is actually self-respect. And we learn to live with a tenderness instead of tenderness.
Medicine.
Yeah. Absolutely. I want to get into some of the sort of more granular aspects of the Never Alone initiative, because some people here are suffering and they want to talk about suicide and how it has touched their life. And Maya said here she lost her mother to suicide, and she's found that talking about it is very uncomfortable. And she wants to know if you guys as experts, you know, in regards to at least this initiative and your work that you've done in psychiatry and so forth, and if there are any thoughts that you have on how to approach conversations to reduce the stigma of this very complicated topic, these thoughts and feelings around losing somebody through suicide. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that you want to share.
Who's going to start?
When I have two MDs on the panel,
I don't want to share. Like I just feel that we need to leave the stage to these incredible minds we have here.
Well, my first thought, I'll jump in, is I feel like it's such a personal experience to have such a profound loss in such a shocking way that I want to respect, you know, I think there isn't a right way or a wrong way to handle this. I think you have to listen to yourself and respect what you're feeling. If you're feeling a call to share, you have to respect that. If you're feeling it's overwhelming and you need to be private, I think you need to listen to what your own intelligence is telling you and respect that, because there is an inner knowing and an inner wisdom of and we're changing all the time. We have a tapestry that is our life, and there are these life events that color it and stain it and sometimes get us stuck. But at this moment, you have to listen to what feels right to you in terms of how to handle it. There's a lot of shame, stigma, pressure to speak up, and that will come in whatever way feels right to you. I think you just need to really go inwards and listen. If it feels uncomfortable to talk about it, then you need to respect that. If it feels comfortable and consoling to share the experience, I would advise really listening deeply to that and respecting what's guiding you.
POONACHA, you were talking about some of, you know, what has come out of the Never Alone initiative over the last 2 years, I would love for you to just share with me a little bit more, all of us, the call to action and how the Never Alone initiative has really taken deep roots. And really, as we wrap it up and we sort of want to help guide people to know that they're never alone, how they can access all of these modalities we've talked about, the movement, and how to find that love and support so that we feel less alone and less lonely.
So I think one of the things we're doing as a platform, so definitely go to neveralone.love, LOVE, and check out the website. You'll have access to all the information. We'll keep it updated with resources. The second thing we're doing is you go to neveralone.love/PV, PIWI. It's actually a chatbot, an emotional AI chatbot. And when we deployed it over a year ago, we have actually had over 3,000 plus suicide interventions. So it's available 24/7. You can go have a conversation with it. And then based on what's happening, it actually does an intervention. And we're doing a similar thing with veterans. You go to Veterans Path, it's called HERA. And when you actually interact with the AI chatbot, you actually you actually connect on the back end to somebody who will pick up the phone and call you. So irrespective, I think our promise to the world is that we want to be available, right? 24/7. So it doesn't matter what's happening. Hopefully we can provide the tools. So definitely go to choprafoundation.org. We'll keep information there, neveralone.love. And once again, through Respect Talks, we'll share more information, Elisabeth, through your network.
And
Okay.
you can speak maybe about the platform, the vision of our platform, POONACHA. You're the technologist, so I'm allowing you to use the right words instead of my story.
So, so the goal, I think our big vision here is to make sure that we are creating a platform called Never Alone, where we actually are creating a currency, a cryptocurrency called Never Alone, where doing good and doing well don't have to be mutually exclusive. If you are teaching yoga in your community, if you're teaching meditation to the senior citizens, we want to be able to reward you with this currency on the platform, and then also unlock content and courses. So I would say definitely go to neveralone.love and sign up, and we will keep you updated over the next year of all the programs we are launching on the platform.
When can we expect to all have access to the app?
App is free right now. So in fact, you can go to the Apple Store or the Google Store, and you can just search for neveralone.love app. It's available right now and it's free. And we're going to be adding more content from
Yeah,
GITA.
we're adding content constantly, and we'll be activating the blockchain element to it in the next 6 months.
Yeah.
But it's there. The framework's there, so you can start testing it.
Okay, well, before we wrap up, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, for taking the time. Really, I appreciate so much the work you're doing just for me as a soul and as a spirit. And I think we all very much need the Never Alone movement to enhance our life experience. If there are any further thoughts anybody wants to share before we get off. And other than that, I want to thank you for your time, and just with great love and great respect, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
I will see everybody here again for another Respect Talk in July, based on the topic of choosing love. And I choose love with you guys. Have a beautiful Sunday.
We love you.
Love you too.
Thank you.
Hi, baby.